When the rain is blowing in your face and the whole world is on your case, I could offer you a warm embrace to make you feel my love. When the evening shadows and the stars appear and there's no one there to dry your tears, I could hold you for 1,000,000 years to make you feel my love. I know you haven't made your mind up yet, and I will never do you wrong. I've known it from the moment that we met, no doubt in my mind where I belong. I'd go hungry, I'd go black and blue, I'd go crawling down the avenue. No, there's nothing that I wouldn't do to make you feel my love. The storms are raging on the rolling sea and on the highway of regret. The winds of change are blowing wild and free. You ain't seen nothing like me yet. I could make you happy, make your dreams come true. No, there's nothing that I wouldn't do. Go to the end of the earth for you to make you feel my love, to make you feel my love.
Good evening, folks. How are you? For those of you that don't know me, Cormac is my name. I was a student of Kevin's for a long time, and I've known him for a long time. And he set me out onto the road of writing, really. And every once in a while, a community is lucky and, dare I say, blessed to have someone in their midst who's a force for good. And Kevin was a force for good. He made time for everyone that he met. And I was talking about this thing. It was amazing to look back and think that when I first attended his creative writing classes in the Galway Technical Institute way back, I had little remaining desire to write at all. And I was unsure about attending a creative writing class. I remember coming into one of the prefabs outside, out of the usual drenching Galway rain, thinking, this fella had better know his onions now, or I swear to God, I'm never writing again. And I was typical of so many of the dozens, if not hundreds, of budding poets that Kevin mentored and championed. And you know what? He did know his onions. And those classes were so enjoyable. And I went back and I kept going back. And I know that so many of the people gathered here can attest that Kevin saw something in their work and he was fearless about bringing out the best elements in it. And he was honest and generous to a fault. And I can remember him saying in that pleasant, sardonic way that he had after I had read a piece that I had submitted one time that poem is gloriously obnoxious. And it could cause some offence. More, please. Cut loose with it. Enjoy it. And that proved to be excellent guidance. And it was Kevin that said to the class at the time as well that if a line makes you smile or laugh, that line is worth keeping. Because that is what Kevin imparted to all his students. Writing and poetry in particular should be fun. And I was saying this to the lads outside in one of those early classes. He said, first off, he said, there's none of this taking out of the heart and plonking it on the table and going, this is all the woe and the awfulness of what we're doing here in the poem. We're here to have fun. We're here to enjoy ourselves. And he was delightful to talk to in those classes and to bounce ideas back and forth. He was also arguably the least precious person I've ever met concerning the art of writing, which was refreshing and a necessary corrective to the calcified image of the artist. And I think he took great delight in that. He showed us how to be brave in our own work. And one of the most important things he told us all at the time was to write with our own voice and to be the best expression of ourselves in our life and in our work. And I think that I speak for everyone here in saying that Kevin and Susan have both been very, very good to all of us. I would like to say that the best tribute we can pay to Kevin is that we all continue on the creative road that he set us all out upon. Both he and Susan have helped to establish a thriving and vital literary community in Galway, and he'd wanted to go on. That said, I still can't believe I'll never hear that pleasant call of "Hello, young man" from across Shop Street, or while perusing the shelves in Charlie Burns, where Kevin loved to browse as much as I did. I think sometimes as well that Kevin had something of a musician's heart in him. The warmth and openness to ideas, the playfulness inherent in them, the rewards of artistic risk and colouring outside the lines if it meant helping the truth of a poem. And Kevin was truthful, make no mistake about that, but above all, he was also kind. I would like to think that he's going to be remembered with smiles and with laughter by everybody here. And I hope that there is an afterlife, that he can see the outpouring of love and affection for him. And I hope that there's a room there with chairs and tables, one placed just so at the top. And the door opens, and a tall figure wearing a hat comes in and takes in the room with a warm, wry smile, and his eyes are agleam with possibilities. And he says to the assembled, "Hello, everybody. You're all very welcome." I hope that the concept of eternity can allow for that. Thank you very much. Now, if you'll excuse me, in my usual fumbling way, I will introduce the next two. There'll be Gary, followed by Brian Haney. Thank you very much.
November the 20th last marked the 40th anniversary of myself and Kevin first meeting. On that day, we were chasing sheep up a mountain boring somewhere between Oughterard and the Hill of Doon. Now, as Kevin might say, some context might be required. We were passengers in a tiny car, young canvassers for the Labour Party in strong Fianna Fáil country in the general election of November 1982. The sheep were blocking the socialist way forward, or so we thought. I was 18 and Kevin was 15. Kevin turned to me and I think he said this was like an episode of Fools and Horses, but not sure which one of us was Rodney and which was Del Boy. Up to that point, I thought he was a young kind of brainiac because he had a kind of an encyclopedic knowledge, like of all the TDs in the Dáil. But then I had discovered that he had a sense of humour, and it was a wicked sense of humour, and it was always irreverent. But it was what united us, and I think it endeared him to so many people. And an example of his irreverence was an early experiment with satire. Kevin often made reference to Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. Well, in 1984, Kevin made his own modest proposal when he wrote a letter to the Connacht Tribune and suggested that the Labour Party dissolve itself at a New Year's Eve party on the stroke of midnight. It's good. It's kind of good, actually. 30 years later, they seem to be taking his advice. Now, I used to slag Kevin about his name being like Kevin O'Higgins. And if you know Kevin, familiar with Kevin's politics, definitely wouldn't like that comparison. And Kevin O'Higgins was one of the early leaders of the Free State, and who was notorious. He notoriously signed the execution warrant of his best man, Rory O'Connor, who took the anti-treaty side. And Rory O'Connor was his best man, and Kevin O'Higgins was his best man at his wedding. Now, Kevin and I were best men at each other's weddings. And Kevin kindly promised me that if he ever came to power as a dictator, he wouldn't have me shot, even though he might have been sorely tempted at times. Now, when Kevin moved to Glenard Crescent in Salt Hill in 1996, that was the beginning of his conquest of the literary world. I used to go over every Friday night, and we would drink tea, and very dubious tea, until maybe 4 or 5 in the morning. It was an exciting period, there was ridiculous drunken nights at a place called O'Shea's, I think in Francis Street or Eglinton Street, and it saw the formation of the writers' group, which I think eventually culminated and led on to Over the Edge. Kevin loved Glenard Crescent, especially its leafiness, and he would often say, "I'm residing in the old part of Vienna." And that is a perfect opportunity, because I would like to read one of my favourite poems by Kevin. It's a short poem called November, because it evokes that time for me. And we were both cranks who professed a love for November because all the tourists were gone from Galway at that time. So this is November by I wasn't sure whether it was in this collection. And it's November. November rampages down the avenue like a gang of victorious soldiers, drunk but still thirsting for more. Eager now, the slaughter comes easy. And winter's bare face glares everywhere at us. The balding trees all along the street suddenly synchronize their watches and admit defeat. Now, we've lost a great poet and a great satirist. Susan has lost a wonderful husband, Helen a brother, and Mark an uncle, and I and many others have lost a great friend. And I wish to dedicate this is a poem I wrote myself 20 years ago, because Kevin again encouraged me always to write. And I managed to get. I had a few modest compared to what Kevin got, but I had a few poems published, and I think it wouldn't have happened, I think, without Kevin's encouragement. And again, this poem reflects the time in Glenard Crescent, because when I used to leave there again at the small hours of the morning, I would drive through town. So and this, because Kevin I think lived in Glenard Crescent from 1996 to about 2004. So I want to dedicate this poem to Kevin, because like we used to after our time in Glenard Crescent, Kevin used to say that was a good discussion. So so this poem is called, because it was usually 3:30 a.m. a lot later when I left there. So, and in the summer it would be completely bright. So this is 3:30 a.m. 3:30 a.m. I am driving home through the centre of this 3:30 a.m. town. Returning from a friend, we have just shut down the world. The night is dry, the long street antiseptically clean, free of utterances. Pristine blue apartments resonate lighting with film studio precision. My car radio is playing organ music. I decelerate halfway across this rectangle while pumping the volume to an octave frenzy. Who inhabits this perfect little dimension? I speculate and turn off for the docks. The radio crumbles to a dead frequency. For Kevin, friend and comrade. Thank you.
I first met Kevin in 1982, having met his mother about 5 minutes before that, his mother Mary. It was during one of the many election campaigns of that period, and I was out for the Labour Party. Although it was probably the most left-wing section of the party in the country, there were always a few people around in the party who would tell you that we're all socialists here, but important not to frighten the voters. So tone it down a little bit. The idea would be sort of leave them with something like, you won't forget us now, will you? That sort of thing. But fortunately, on that particular evening, I was on my own, so I was able to give it welly. And that's what I was doing with, I went into the house now in Carberry Road, knocked on the door, out came Mary. So I began to speak to her, and not holding back about in terms of the politics and the radicalism and so on. And she was listening to me with intense interest, I felt. And when I'd finished, she said to me, you know, I've a young lad here who'd like to talk to you. And she brought out the young lad, and he was a young lad. He was 14. And we talked for a while, and it struck me even then that he was, in some respects, he was very much like a young teenager, and in certain respects, very much not. The things he knew, the confidence with which he said them, was very, very impressive. And even then, he had that droll, sardonic humour and that way of talking that was so much a part of his personality and so much a part of his poetry, and that never left him. So he asked me about he asked me some questions. I told him about the militant, the Trotskyist organisation within the Labour Party that I was in, and he wanted to join. And I remember talking to other people at the time, and we were very reluctant because young fellas keen. We always want recruits, but he was very, very young. And I suggested to him afterwards that, you know, we could talk and maybe wait a while, you know, take your time. He wasn't having any of it. He knew what he wanted. This was the real deal. He wanted in, and he insisted, and that was it. In later years, during his time in London, he continued his political activity there. He was part of the anti-poll tax campaign, which did so much to bring down Margaret Thatcher. But around this time as well, he grew disillusioned with the internal life of the politics and so on, which is often, it has to be said, could be very personal and quite venomous. And he left. But he was never one of those people who look back at their youthful radicalism as one of those mad kind of things. He used to get up and you look back on it in sort of amused, rueful tones later on. Or one of those people who would quote, you know, anybody who isn't a radical at 20 has no heart, and anybody who is still a radical at 40 has no head. And they'd laugh at that. Kevin was never one of those, never. Instead what he did was he took his activism into poetry and into satire. Now, Irish satire over the last 100 years or so has a long and utterly undistinguished history. Usually consists of making fun of the funny voices of its targets, of the politicians, and laughing at them, but always from inside the club. What they forget, or maybe what they never knew, is that satire is humour, yes, but it's also anger. And it has to come from an anger at the way things are. And I'll just read a short poem from Kevin's, from his very first collection, actually, called The Satirist, which sums up his approach. The Satirist. Society may flash its knickers at him, but flowers or love songs he will not bring them. Instead, the audience ripples with nervous laughter as, from his jacket, he takes a scalpel. And, his mask slipping a little, they see him briefly as he really is, coming with a warrant, all their names on it. In passing, could I say as well that when he's referred to as the satirist, when I hear him referred to as the satirist Kevin Higgins, I think it would be a pity as well if people forget some of the marvellous poems he wrote. And Gary read one there, for example, just a few moments ago, about the things that poets have always written about love and life and nature and so on, and most remarkably, of course, in recent weeks as well, about death. And finally, just to say that this savage satirist was one of the kindest of men. And he also had a somewhat old-fashioned quality as well of courteousness in his speech, in his body language and so on, which is somewhat unusual, I think, nowadays. And he was also great fun. And even visiting him in hospital over the last period, what struck me was just how often you would be laughing with him. That sense of fun never left. And it is so sad for him, for Susan, for his family and many friends that he didn't get the 2 more years that he hoped he might have had. And then he had a feeling, well, those 2 more years, and then maybe who knows what medical science might be able to do. And almost to the end, he held on to that hope. But he lived a very fine life. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Now, next up to speak, we would have Margaret, followed by Rachel Coventry. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Margaret Flannery. I've worked with Kevin in Galway's public hospitals for the last 17 years. It's been a funny week. Kevin worked closely with me in Galway's public hospitals, both in University Hospital Galway and Merlin Park, for the last 17 years as writer in residence. He brought so much warmth, empathy and humour to the patients, staff and visitors he worked with. I love sitting in on his sessions with the long-term residents in Units 5 and 6 in Merlin Park. He worked with them for several years, initially working on reminiscences, but with his encouragement he eventually got them to start writing creatively, and they've published initially 4 books on reminiscence, but then they went on to publish 2 books of poetry, which I'm going to read a little bit from shortly. For the past week I've been going through those books created with the patients and staff. And to use the words about our arts and health work, Kevin's own words, he said, "It is the essential stuff which defines our humanity and distinguishes the fully lived life from mere existence." Sorry, I'm a bit shaky. But within the books, as the other speakers have spoke about, is Kevin's humour and his irreverence, but that came across very much in the patient's writing as well. As you'll see, Louis Hanley at Unit 5. Louis was a stalwart in Kevin's workshops. Until Louis's death, he participated, and they were such good friends and really used to rip the proverbial out of each other. As you'll see, Louis at Unit 5 of Merlin Park revealed himself to be something of a master of the slightly subversive rhyme. I was delighted to learn that one of Louis's targets was, in a manner of speaking, me. Nothing is sacred in these writing workshops, and that is as it absolutely must be. Writing is about freedom and can never be about a facilitator telling anyone in the group what they should or shouldn't say. So, Louis's poem. Dear Patron Saint of Unit 5 by Louis Hanley. Dear Patron Saint of Unit 5, I thank you kindly that I'm alive, and I ask you please, in the name of heaven, if you'll kick the arse of our poet Kevin. Seal to Arts would like to make it clear that no poets were kicked during the making of this poem. As well as the patients, in this particular year, some of the local community came into the workshops in the hospital as well, and the patients and staff. So Flish, who's here, Flish McCarthy, at one of the events, or one of the workshops, asked Kevin, well, why aren't you writing something? Why won't you do the creative exercise as well? She wasn't happy to let him sit there. So he had asked the group to write about an object or symbolic importance to him. So he took up the challenge, and the result is the poem Memoirs of a Carrier Bag. He takes and he has included it here in the collection. Again, in the late 1980s and early 90s, back when I was an anti-poll tax activist in London, I always had about me, my person, a carrier bag. Nowadays, on my weekly round, I usually have with me a slightly better quality bag, full of books and other creative writing-related things. The ghost of that left-wing carrier bag still walks. When I finished this poem, I tweaked it a little and sent it to David Conway, who was the deputy leader of Enfield Council, where I lived and was active all those years ago. Memoirs of a Carrier Bag for David Conway by Kevin Higgins. I'm a receipt for 50 pence worth of hummus, a small brown Hovis, Tesco's, Edmonton Green, January 3rd, 1991. I'm a return ticket to railings being thrown at the police. I'm the sticker that the British National Party stuck on the kitchen window. I'm a small black notebook full of phone numbers it would now be wrong to ever ring. I'm a piece of orange peel from the night the First Gulf War began. I'm the deputy leader of the council and a worn copy of the Enfield Advertiser stating he takes no notice of what the egregious Mr. Higgins says. I'm a leaflet, a copy of which lives in the Enfield People's Museum. I'm a pamphlet no one read about a world that never was. As well as the participative workshops that Kevin worked with over the years, he came up with the idea. We also had a project have a project called Poems for Patients, which has been ongoing now since 2004, where a poet comes to read a court and they're invited to select 21 poems to be on display in the hospital. Over the years, it just mushroomed. When I was on maternity leave, Kevin and Susan kindly took over and did the helped with the selection and the editing of it when I wasn't available, which I was so grateful for. And as it grew, we began to be inundated with people wanting to display their poems for patients in the hospitals. So I was going, oh, Kevin, I can't keep writing emails to people, turning them down. What could we possibly do? And he came up with the idea of the Poems for Patients competition. So we had our inaugural competition in 2013 and has continued to grow. Kevin had agreed to be the judge again for this year in 2023. But in all the years there isn't a Kevin Higgins poem, but he gifted me a poem that I'll read now. That it was the first poem since he started publishing in the Advertiser about his illness. This was the first poem, and he has gifted it me to include in the Poems for Patients. So I will really look forward in April when it happens to celebrate Kevin's life and have this poem on display in our hospitals. Mr. Cogito considers the side effects after Janusz Krocek. Baldness and shortness of breath, a sudden urge to vomit on coats your own and other people's. Dry mouth, brittle nails, a tendency to be not very good at driving forklift trucks and to become even worse at pole vaulting than you already were. Explosive watery diarrhoea and fecal impaction, sometimes both simultaneously, for the human body likes nothing better than a good argument with itself. Infertility, anemia, thrombocytopenia, and life itself are all possible side effects of drugs such as these. I'm going to miss Kevin dearly. He's left a huge hole in the hospitals in Galway, but in my heart as well. He meant the world to me, and such a good friend who I drank copious amounts of tea, and a meeting with some of our artists might take 45 minutes to an hour. With Kevin, I made sure to leave of half an afternoon because we had so much to talk about, and he was such a good friend, and I'm going to miss him. But I'll just leave it with this. It's the final poem in the last publication in the hospital that Kevin worked on, called This Never Happened. We Are the Troika, a song that two of the patients put together at the end of their final session with Kevin. We Are the Troika by Louis Hanley for the voice of Dr. Oscar de Souza. Madeleine, Louis and me meet for creative writing and compose on a theme. When it's over, we read what we wrote. We are the Troika, Madeleine, Louis and me. When I tried to write this song with only one woman in mind, she's charming and beautiful and in every way divine. Her name is Madeleine, a goddess in disguise, and today we are crowning her the Queen of Unit 5. We are the Troika, Madeleine, Louis and me, and our organiser, Kevin Higgins. See, now that it's over, we hope and we pray we'll meet again another day.
first I'd just like to express my sympathies to Susan. The words Kevin and Susan just trip off the tongue, and I'm so sorry. It's been really my name is Rachel Coventry. I walked into a workshop in 2010. And it's been really something to witness the tributes and the expressions of love and respect for Kevin in the last few months, and especially since his death on Tuesday. As the week progressed, I read many eloquent accounts of his contribution. And in these, we start to get a bare glimpse of what his legacy will be. But there was something shocking about this for me, because while I am fully aware of Kevin's accomplishments, you don't tend to think of the person drinking yet another cup of tea across from you in Roots Cafe as a legend. I just thought of Kevin as my good friend. I looked forward to our lunches and generally had a mental list of things I wanted to tell him about, things I knew he would find funny. In fact, there were a few times this week I wanted to text him and say, guess what? I won't lie, the tone of our lunches could be quite conspiratorial. As we all know, Kevin had little time for the inauthentic. These conversations were illuminating and sometimes righteous, but they were also a big part of how I navigated the strange life of being a poet. Like many people here, I learned a lot about how to be a poet from Kevin. Can you imagine a legacy better than that? One of the best things about Kevin Higgins is that he did not take himself too seriously, which now that I think about it is an essential quality for anyone who writes. Like the rest of us, he wasn't perfect. There were the jumpers, for instance. And the persistent delusion that one day they would come back into fashion. As a satirist, he could be critical, harsh even. And it's tempting to see Kevin in terms of a duality. On the one hand, his pulls, no punches satire, and on the other hand, the loving manner in which he facilitated other poets, including myself, in his many workshops and at Over the Edge. But these aspects are entirely consistent with one another. Kevin's encouragement of other poets was nothing less than a rebellion against the commodification of the poet and of poetry, which, as he pointed out, has come to characterize so much of Irish poetry. And conversely, even his most vitriolic poems were an act of love, an attempt to shake out something real from an increasingly phony world. And it's for this reason I thought a lot about which poem to read. And I picked this one because I know he loved it. And as I read it a few times earlier and yesterday to make sure that I could read it, I'm just stunned by the craft in all of his poems. Like nobody could workshop a poem like Kevin Higgins. It's completely tragic that that's amazing talent is gone. So, a brief history of all those who made their point politely. And then went home by Kevin Higgins. On this day of tear gas and soul, and windows broken in Dickens and Jones, I can't help wondering why a history of those who made their point politely and then went home has never been written. Those who, in the heat of the moment, never dislodged a policeman's helmet, never blocked the traffic or held the country to ransom, someone should ask them, was it all worth it? And all those proud men and women who never had the National Guard sent in against them, who left everything exactly as they found it, without adding as much as a scratch to the paintwork, with no one bothering, whom no one bothered asking, have you or have you ever been, because we all know damn well they never were. Thank you.
ended in good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. If I had money enough to spend and leisure time to sit a while, there is a fair maid in this town that sorely has my heart beguiled. Her rosy cheeks and ruby lips, she has my heart enthralled. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. A man may drink and not be drunk. A man may fight and not be slain. A man may court a pretty girl and perhaps be welcomed back again. But since it has so ordered been, by a time to rise and a time to fall, so fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all.
Emmett Farrell will be followed by Tara to speak. Thank you.
I knew Kevin for 40 years that John Cunningham referred to in his very, very good piece on Facebook, which I'd recommend that people read. I just want to talk a little bit about his politics. I heard about Kevin before. I was working in Lesotho in Southern Africa for a few years. And just before I came home at the end of 1983, I got a message from somebody, people here might know John Throne, and he said they've come across a really good young fella in Galway. So I met this very good young fella, Kevin, in the following years, and was very impressed by him. He was very interested in South Africa, and we had a few meetings with Nimrod Jackie and Kevin speaking, and tried to do our best to further knowledge of the struggle in South Africa there. Then he was in England, and I remember John Cunningham referred to Welling and to Trafalgar Square in his poem. And I remember the Trafalgar Square discussion I had with him about the poll tax, and he was very, very happy that things were moving towards revolutionary conclusions in the 90s, as many of us were. And similarly, in 1993, when there had been three black people killed by white thugs with knives in the previous 14 months, and the most recent one was Stephen Lawrence. And 3 weeks after that, a councillor had been elected for the British National Party, the first ever, in the Isle of Dogs in London. So a demonstration was called, and Kevin was one of the stewards on that. And I went over from Dublin to it with a busload of people. And it was quite interesting. It was a United Left demonstration, which was unusual and a good thing. But when I met Kevin, we were just beside a wall, where on the wall was written BNP 3, niggers not. So that was the kind of context this march was called. And they'd opened a bookshop in this place, Welling, and the demonstration, which the police said was 25,000 on it, the organisers said 50 or 60,000. But it was a very impressive demonstration, and of course it was attacked by the police. And we were stewards. Kevin was one of them, and you had these horses attacking the demonstration. It was quite frightening, actually, if you were involved in it. But at that time, again, that was 1993, October, I think. He was quite confident that we were on the way to a different kind of society. However, a couple of years later, I got a call from him and met him in Dublin, and we had a few hours discussion, and he was very, very down, very disillusioned. There had been a lot of factionalism had developed as things didn't work out in the way that we had thought, and often these things become personal, as the point was made. But he went back to Galway, and I continued to try and keep an eye on what he was doing and so on. I was trying to get him back into politics, but he did actually make a better judgment and went into the over the edge area and the poetry, which he was very good at. And of course, he met Susan, which was transformative for both of them in a wonderful partnership. Many of us felt that it looks kind of silly now, but many of us believed in the idea that society could be changed in the the late 80s and the early 90s, And unfortunately now, 30 years later, we have, the people we call super rich in the 1990s are, way, way more super rich than we could even have imagined then. And instead of, a socialist revolution in the 1990s, we got, things like what was called the Third Way and the Rainbow Coalitions and the Tony Blair's and the wars and so on that followed from it. So it was sort of inevitable that many people would become disillusioned. But what was good about Kevin's position is that although he wasn't involved in formal party politics, that he didn't lose his socialist commitment, and he had a lot of time for, he talked in the wonderful poem that he wrote before he died, he mentioned the books that made me. And, I'd talked to him a couple of times about those, the books of, the works of Leon Trotsky and Victor Serge and others, wonderful, wonderful writing, which I still encourage people to read. In any case, he stayed with me a few times in Dublin when he came to launch books or speak at poetry readings up there, and I was really impressed by as many people obviously were as well, by the calibre of the poetry that he was writing, and I think it's quite wonderful. I'd love to have gone to this Over the Edge myself, because I had some kind of germs of something I wanted to write about, but he encouraged me, but I never got around to it, and it breaks my heart that when I tried to see him after Christmas, that I got on the train in Dublin at 7:20 and got to the station at 10 o'clock, sauntered up to the hospital. I used to live in Galway, so I was looking at old ghosts and new buildings all over the place. And when I got into the hospital, Kevin had just passed away. So I was at the Golean Club in Dublin on Friday night, which is a traditional singing club, which is there for the last 40 years. It's quite a good place to go if you're in Dublin on a Friday night. But I read his poem, and people were hugely impressed by it, And I had put it on the family WhatsApp, where I have a sister, a nun in Tanzania, and she came back to me and she said, "That's a wonderfully moving poem, in particular about the books on the floor. That's the books that made him, So I haven't any real comment to make on the poetry, but I just want to say that he was a socialist and a poet who wasn't, fawning on the government, looking for grants or anything like that. I mean, it's wonderful. He got a wonderful tribute from Michael D. Higgins, But that didn't stop Kevin from having a go at the same Michael D. When he was the Minister for the Arts, and people were writing songs about him, rocking in the Dáil for them. But when Prince Charles came to Ireland and the Labour Party were in coalition, Kevin wrote to the newspapers saying that if Michael D. voted for this, the crimes of the British Empire by voting for Prince Charles to come, like that, he would be letting us all down. But it's obviously Higgins has a bit of sense of humour as well. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Darryl, old friend of Kevin's. I met him in the early 90s, the Welling and Trafalgar Square days in London, as has already been mentioned. I actually got to know him on his return to London, so it was after the poll tax, but Margaret Thatcher had gone, but the court cases and the debts were still being collected, people were still having their furniture seized, people were being sent to prison for non-payment of the poll tax debt. And this is where me and Kevin first got together, fighting against that rearguard action, against the consequences of the already dead poll tax. Kevin's activities, as an organiser, I should say, he was absolutely brilliant. And he took those skills into his later poetry teaching, mentoring world. They were the same skills, really. An intense interest in people. He was interested in everyone, including, in 1994, my newborn son. Kevin was the first person other than mother and father to hold the child, to be recognised by the child. And he'd sit with a 2-month-old baby on his lap, on our sofa, absolutely engrossed by what this small human being was trying to communicate. That was Kevin. He loved life, he loved people more than anything. And through, whether it be his politics, whether it be his mentoring, his writing, his journalism, it was all aimed at getting the best out of people. And this is what made him the enemy of those people who exist in the politics and the literature world and throughout society who always think they know best. They are terrified of ordinary people finding their voice, expressing themselves, doing something about it. So Kevin was really the same person throughout the phases of his life, and he had the same aim in different spheres. He wanted people to find their voice and use it to make the world a better place in small ways and in big ways. I had a script and I've gone nowhere near it. Personally, people have talked of Kevin's kindness. We cemented our friendship when I played a role in keeping him out of prison for his unpaid poll tax debt. There was this weird, arcane, legal thing in Britain called a Mackenzie's friend, named after a court case where someone called Mackenzie managed to persuade the judge to allow his friend to speak for him. And this then, with British law being based on precedent, carried on, which allowed me and others in the campaign to speak on behalf of people who were being put up for imprisonment by the council for unpaid debt. And so I was able to successfully argue that Kevin could not be possibly refusing to pay the poll tax because he was unable to pay the poll tax. A distinction which the magistrate accepted. Kevin was released, and he very kindly credited me with keeping him out of prison. The other thing, of course, Kevin was brilliant at was generating publicity. He had an abiding fear of an empty room, whether that be for political meetings in the 80s and the early 90s, or whether that be for workshops, for readings. And so he was an incessant publicist. Some would say self-publicist, but all for the right reasons. But that morning at about 11 a.m, when Kevin was released from the dock and excused of his debt to Enfield Council, there was a truly Higgins-esque inspired bit of provocation. He rang the local newspaper, got the photographer to come and photograph me and him, cheering his release on the basis that he didn't have a pot to piss in, with a pint of Guinness in the local pub, which was then published in the Enfield Advertiser the following Friday. I've gone on enough. I'll just read a poem and end. Kevin was a great observer of life, and that was what makes his writing uncliched, the opposite of cliched. And it was the same with politics, and he was always interested in how things were said and not just what was being said. He'd seen so many good political ideas die on the rocks of turgid prose and over long speeches. I need to be careful here. But he observed things, and he observed me, and I made it into a few of his poems. And he dedicated his post-Brexit post-mortem to me, published in the Irish Times, which was very nice. But he wrote a poem about me, which he sent to me when I was at a particularly low ebb as a single parent having problems with a teenage son. And he cheered me up with the following, which he threw back at me. A lot of stuff that I'd been saying to him and had then forgotten about. It's called You Dream Again of Bus Conductors. It's addressed to me. In that corner of your mind that's always on its way to Leicester, circa 1979, men in brown coats deliver rented TVs. Your sister's going out with an arsehole called Andy, and smoking is good for you. You gobble nationalised sandwiches on trains that are all the same colour. These are the years of porridge and brick-built buildings before automatic doors made us all soft. A simple painted sign with the name of the owner stood above every shop door. The air is the exhaust fumes from the local factory. Sunday is nothing open and no one phoning. Looking for the future, you join the Labour Party and find the past. But there's always someone to punch a proper hole in your ticket and tell you where to get off the bus. Well, Kevin has now got off the bus long before his intended stop, and us remaining passengers will miss him like hell.
And now, folks, Trevor Sherlock is up next, followed by Susan Lindsay. Thank you.
Hiya, folks. My name is Trevor Sherlock, for those who don't know me. And Kevin has been a friend of mine, and a very good friend of mine, since I was 10 years old. Firstly, I just wanted to make a couple of observations before I read this. The first one is I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the literary notion of the pathetic fallacy. And by God, that weather, which is the longest stretch of intense rain I think I've seen ever, has been in keeping with the sombre tone. of Kevin's passing until today, when we have a celebration of the man's life. And also, Kevin was actually a long-suffering Liverpool fan like myself, and the plight of those lads as well is in keeping with it. And now an important observation. And this is something that I said to Kevin and some time ago. And Kevin said that he said this to you, Sue. And I hope he did say it to you. And that is, of all the partners of good friends of mine, and they're all fantastic people in their own right, I think, without hesitation, I would say you had the most positive, beneficial, wonderful impact on a friend of mine. And that was on an already good way. As after Kevin had passed, I emailed a classmate of ours. The classmate is a chap called Mark Mills. He lived in the Newcastle area of Galway, fairly close to actual Kevin, and he was a good friend of Kevin and mine from our school days. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of subvert this. This is Mark's sentiments, Mark Mills's sentiments. He's based in New Hampshire in the States now. And I'm going to read his sentiments because they sum up what I feel and in a better way. And Mark isn't a formal writer anyway. It just goes to show the impact Kevin had on all sorts of people, not just writers, but people in so many. He was linked with so many areas, politics and many others. So this is what Mark said to me. "Ah, Jesus, Trevor, that's deeply saddening news. I really loved Kevin. He was such a wonderful person, with such a lovely way about him. I remember opening our Evening Cert results together at a bar around the corner from St. Pat's School. I just loved his sense of humour and his infectious laugh. Thanks for letting me know. May he rest in peace. His memory and the laughter we shared will stay in my heart forever. Mark." Now, the one thing, Kevin, unlike myself, Kevin was, as we know, a devout atheist. And I do hope he was wrong about one thing, because I do hope we will meet again someday. Thank you very much, folks.
Our day-to-day acquaintance with slagging was taken to a whole new level with the irony and wit of Kevin. When I was a young person, I had a lot of faith in God, but I didn't have a strong enough image or imagination for a big enough God. So when I met sociology and anthropology in a social science in college, I lost it. And bereft, it began to change when I became aware of something that seemed to be laughter from God or the gods. And it seems to me that Minerva, the champion of poetry, the art, and war as well, and wisdom, had her revenge on Kevin, because in his last time, when Time, Gentlemen, Please was being called for his last months and years, drink up, Kevin was only allowed to drink champagne. Kevin would introduce me on any occasion we had and say, I am advised that this person might have been lost to poetry forever on the first class she attended, because he presented us a poem that was very, I'm losing my words, that was very visceral. It was a poem, And that was the class of 2005. And I came today with the person who said to me after the class, who was in the class, Connie Masterson, I hope you'll come back. And I said I would. And my hostess at the moment said to me, what was your first impression of Kevin Higgins? And I said, when you went to that first class, and I said, I didn't have any impression of Kevin Higgins. I was too terrified, just trying to get through the class. But I do remember walking down the street a few weeks later and thinking, I do love it when somebody does something extraordinarily well. And Kevin does something extraordinarily well as a teacher and as a community worker, I felt, in the way that he drew us all together. And it's not only Connie, but Mary Medek is here, and some others, of Denise, people who were around at that time still. And it was due to Kevin and Susan and all of you that I can recognise a lot of the faces here today, because when I first came to Galway, I knew hardly anyone. And I am immeasurably grateful for that and for the 15 years I was able to live here in Galway. Kevin was, as people have said, incredibly kind. And we used to, when I went to the North Beach slams, Kevin and Susan supported those and so many other kinds of events. He said to me, are you scared? And I said, well, I get my stage fright the morning after when I can't get out of bed for the rest of the day. And he invited me to meet him for a coffee on Quay Street when he was doing his next tour of the city, postering posters across the entire town, which is how I came to be in the class in the first place. And it was only ages afterwards that I put those two things together. He got me out of the bed into town to meet him when I might have been hiding. Kevin will live on in his poems, of course, but he'll also live on in the writers that all of you have become and everything that you write. I am so, so sorry, Susan, that you and he have had a shorter time than would have wished together. And I'm so sorry for you, his family, and for all of you, his friends. Kevin has inspired me to make sure that I get off my ass and keep going at things. He has inspired me by his dedication to his passion, to give everything, to hope that he clung to, that the world could, despite all his evidence to the contrary, become a better place. Maybe the poem I'm going to read is a precursor to the one that was published in the Advertiser this week. And it's Time, Gentlemen, Please, from the book of the same name. Again, your head full of novels, you'll definitely get down on paper one of these days. And Prague, Budapest, Hemingway or Che, the same old questions, only a little bit less, night after night, for years. Until all that remains are a few old acquaintances over hot whiskies whispering, not quite here, not quite there. His life just a fence he got piles sitting on. As through the mild October streets your hearse makes haste. Thank you.
Now, folks, next up to speak is Mark, followed by Mary. Thanks very much.
Hello everyone, my name's Mark, I'm Kevin's nephew. I thought what to say in a room full of such great writers and speakers, and I thought I'd read a couple of his poems that I remembered from when I was younger. I spent many school holidays coming over to Galway, sitting at the kitchen table in Carberry Road with Kevin, who was a regular feature there, with mugs of tea lining up as if he and my grandmother were competing in the final of the tea drinking Olympics. Perhaps his only true rival when it came to that. I thought back to his first couple of collections. His first one was published when I was 14 in 2005, called The Boy with No Face. And I remember reading through it and just feeling so proud that I was reading printed words in a real book that my uncle had published. And I read through the whole thing again yesterday, and one of them jumped out at me as something I just remembered enjoying as that 14-year-old. It features his politics, obviously, some humour, his love of our feline friends, and I just remember enjoying it when I was that age. So this is called Talking with the Cat About World Domination. The day George W. Bush almost choked on a pretzel. Now that pretzel's gone and done something an expert like you never would, loosening its hold a split second too soon. I think it's time we revised our strategy. Just sitting back waiting for the big collapse, face facts, it isn't happening. If there's a job to be done, why not us? This time tomorrow we'll be in Washington telling Bush to come out with his hands up. Faced with me and you, Puss, I bet he'll just crumble. And we'll whisk him off to Guantanamo Bay, where he'll share a cage with the Emir of Kuwait. I see from the frown wrinkling your brow, you're worried, perhaps, how Mariah Carey fans everywhere might react. Too late for all that. To put it in terms I think you'll understand, after the years wasted here in this litter tray, it's time to deliver for me and you, Puss, our battle cry. Something snappy like, yes, I have it. Repeat after me. Don't make me angry, Mr. McGee. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. I also read through a second collection, Time Gentleman Please, published 3 years later yesterday, and I came across this one, which he obviously wrote some time ago, but I thought I had to read it because it's very Kevin, and if ever there was a day, today is that day. Last Testament. Whether I leave this world peacefully, surrounded by respectable nephews and voluptuous nieces, or go roaring at 4 a.m. in the prison hospital, come what may, let no black crow sit squawking by my bed, but pin this sign above my head. This fucker here does not repent. Would do the same again and worse. Yes, when I have gasped my final gasp, let Satan clap his hands and cry, at last. May I be down below having dinner with Tricky Dicky, sharing dirty jokes with old Al Haig, before nice Father What's-His-Name realizes I'm gone.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm Kevin's favourite cousin. And he was mine, and I'm sure these others won't mind. I'm very, very lucky and very privileged that I'm able to say that. Kevin and I grew up in the 70s and the early 80s, and Kevin's family moved in with us initially. Kevin's family moved in initially with us in the early 70s, and then when we came to Galway in the early 80s, we moved in with them. Now, the 70s and 80s, as Trevor has referred to, that would be the Galway of H. Williams and Quinsworth, the Muppet Show and the Wombles. And it was the time that Liverpool did have their glory years, and we were supporters of that. We were also big tennis fans, so we'd watch Wimbledon, and then Kevin and I would head up to the courts in the college and play tennis. So Sundays then were spent visiting Larrigan, where we met the grandparents, and meeting up with the cousins, playing with them. And then we'd go there. We'd also be going to the Galway hurling and football matches. Now that was long before seatbelts were invented for backseat passengers, as Steve would know. So then it was time to grow up, kind of. So Kevin went off to the UK to do his grown-up things. But thankfully we reconnected in the early 2000s. And then Sunday afternoons were spent playing tennis in the West Side, followed by tea and fig rolls and Jaffa cakes. For me, Kevin was fun. Our relationship was always easy. And like the rest, I've enjoyed countless cups of tea in Carberry Road and many chats about putting the world to right and wrong. When Kevin contacted me there in late October with the news of his illness, no doubt like the rest of you, I was devastated. But then he moved his home office into the Claddagh ward and he kept doing all the things that he liked. He was writing poems and articles, he was keeping track of world events, updating his social media, and he was entertaining his visitors, and entertaining he was. And all this became really normal, and it was so easy to forget that he was sick, and we did. So then I was appointed as his personal Deliveroo, and we would have pizza and tea nights, long after all the other patients were gone to bed. And we would chat about everything. The current challenges, the old times that we shared, the World Cup and the previous World Cups, the war in Ukraine, renewing all relationships, and we covered a lot, and it was great. And these are my memories of Kevin, and that's why I know I am lucky and privileged to be part of his story. So now they give me a job to do. So on behalf of the family, we want to express our deep gratitude to all of Kevin's medical teams in Merrill Park and UHG for their dedication to his care. We particularly want to express our thanks to the kind and caring nursing staff of the Claddagh ward who met all his medical needs with such warmth and professionalism. We especially want to thank Mairead and for her kindness to Kevin and to us on 2 very difficult days early this week. We want to thank the catering staff who supplied Kevin with copious cups of tea and ginger nut biscuits. To the cleaning staff who worked diligently to keep patients, staff and the visitors to the Claddagh ward safe during this time. And to the medical professionals who enabled Kevin to go home in December. But to every single person who contacted Kevin over the last 10 weeks, whether this was with a visit, and especially those who brought tea and treats, through social media, by email, text, phone calls, and even old style by post, by sending a card or a letter. You can be assured that Kevin read every one of these himself, so he knew the thoughtfulness and all of the good wishes that were being sent to him. And there is no doubt that this kept his spirits up during this period, and we are truly, truly grateful for that. I'm going to read a piece from a student called Michael Quinn, who put in a condolence online. And what he said was, "He that's gone before us is nature blessed. For other living poets, it's time to get dressed, take off their hats and say their best, sending Kevin off to his very early rest. He helped so many poets grow. Were there no more words for him to sow?" So finally, we want to thank Kevin, our Kevin, for being just that, our Kevin. Because look what we got. Wasn't that enough?
Now, folks, Susan would like to say a few words. Thank you.
First of all, thank you all for being here. You'll be no doubt happy to know that I'm the last speaker. After me, Nicole is going to grace us with a song, and I'm going to explain why that song now. I had 24 years with Kevin, blessed beyond measure to have them. And people often ask how we met, and I thought I'd tell you a very brief version of the story. I was new to Galway. This is January of 1999. I was new to Galway. I had found a job and immediately lost it. And so I had no income and very few friends, and I was at a loss. And Kevin and his friend Mike Begnall started a poetry magazine called The Burning Bush. And they put up a flyer in the library asking for submissions. So I sent in 3 poems. Now, here is where his version and my version differ. My version is that I sent 3 poems and a letter saying, if you need anybody to do any proofreading, I'm available. His version is that I sent 3 poems and my entire CV, which went on for several pages. I don't think I did that, but it's a better story. So his version kind of won over the years. So he phoned me, full of curiosity, who was this American, and we met. And the very first time we met, we sat over coffee for 4 hours and talked. I don't think I've ever had the experience of talking to somebody who was so articulate and interesting, but also so interested in me. And I think that was one of his gifts, is he would make you feel that you were the most interesting person in the world. And so at the end of 4 hours, we agreed that I'd come to his apartment on Friday afternoon and we'd start the proofreading. And I went to his apartment on Friday afternoon, and absolutely no proofreading got done. And Kevin had a problem, which I didn't know, which was that Gary, as he has referenced, often came by on a Friday evening to hang out and drink tea. And this is the day before mobile phones. Kevin didn't have a landline. The way that he would phone people is to walk 10 minutes uphill to a shop and use the payphone. So he was trying to figure out how to warn Gary off. And what he actually did, at one point he said, "Would you care for a glass of wine?" Well, I really couldn't have cared less one way or the other, but out of, agreeability, I said, "I'd love a glass of wine." And he stood up and grabbed his jacket and said, "Right, I'll go buy a bottle." And I was going, no, it's fine, no. Yeah. And he left, and I thought, he's coming back, right? What's going on? He was gone for 20 minutes. He went to the shop. He did buy the bottle of wine. He phoned Gary, and I'm told he said, "I have an American on my hands, potentially." Very romantic. And Gary said something to the extent of, "Understood," and he didn't come. And that was where it started. We got married in 2005. We were the first couple ever to get married in the Galway Arts Centre. We did it that way because we really wanted a place that was truly sacred to us, and art and self-expression were and are sacred to us. And it was a wonderful day. I still think of it as the best day of my entire life. And when I walked down the aisle, I didn't walk down, because of course we can't do anything like other people do them. I didn't walk down the aisle to the wedding march. I walked down the aisle to the Beatles song, "All You Need Is Love," because that was as close as we ever came to a motto. All you need is love, for people, for what you do, for what you care about. And I want you all to know, I wasn't planning to say this, but when Kevin and I first were told that he probably only had weeks left, what he said to me was, "I have no regrets. I love my life. I just like more of it." And so All You Need Is Love became our song, and Nicole is going to grace us with that song now. Nicole?
Nothing you can do that can't be done. There's nothing you can sing that can't be sung. There's nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. There's nothing you can make that can't be made. There's no one you can save that can't be saved. There's nothing you can do, but you can find yourself in time. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Love, love, love. Love, love, love. Love, love, love. There's nothing you can know that can't be known. There's nothing you can see that can't be shown. There's nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. There's nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Love is all you need. Love is all you need.
There's tea, coffee, and sandwiches at the House Hotel. We'd be delighted if you'd join us there. You can also buy something stronger if that's what you'd like. We'll see some of you down there. Thank you for being here.